Darius had always valued a quiet life. After years of intense service in the Delta Force, he had retired early, craving peace, stability, and the chance to be present for his family. The military had taught him discipline, patience, and vigilance, but it had also left him wary of unnecessary conflict. He preferred to stay unnoticed, blending into the rhythm of everyday life, enjoying small routines that most people took for granted: grocery shopping, dropping his son off at school, walking around the neighborhood. These were moments of calm he cherished. On that particular afternoon, the sun hung lazily over the streets, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Darius had just finished picking up a few essentials from the store. The shopping bags were tucked into the back of his car, and his young son sat in his booster seat, nodding off after a busy morning. Darius enjoyed these quiet drives. They gave him a chance to think, to process, and to feel some normalcy that had been missing during his years in service. As he drove through his neighborhood, he noticed traffic seemed heavier than usual. Cars were stopping suddenly. People were walking faster than normal, and a sense of restlessness lingered in the air. Darius had always been observant, and the small details didn't escape him. He adjusted his speed, keeping a close eye on the cars ahead. Everything seemed ordinary until he noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. A police car was signaling him to pull over. Darius's heart rate didn't spike, but his instincts kicked in. He knew that encounters with law enforcement could escalate quickly, especially for a black man driving alone or with a child. He signaled, slowed down, and pulled to the side, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. Two officers approached, their steps hurried and tense. They didn't greet him. They didn't ask questions politely. They barked orders demanding he exit the car immediately. Darius stayed calm. His voice, measured and steady, explained that he was complying, asking if they could speak for a moment to understand the situation. The officers' eyes narrowed, their posture aggressive, and Darius realized their assumptions had already decided the tone of this encounter. The first officer leaned toward the car, peering inside. Darius kept his hands in clear view, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting lightly on the edge of the seat. "My son is in the car," he said softly but firmly. "I don't want anyone to get hurt. Step out of the vehicle." The officer snapped. His tone carried the kind of urgency that left no room for negotiation. Darius complied slowly, moving carefully to ensure his son remained calm. He opened the car door and his son stirred, rubbing his eyes, confused by the shouting. Darius placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, whispering that everything was okay. Even as he followed the officer's orders, Darius's mind raced. He had seen situations like this before during his deployments, where split-second decisions determined who lived and who didn't. While he wanted to avoid confrontation, he also knew that he could not be caught off guard. Every muscle in his body tensed, not in anger but in readiness. He positioned himself in a way that gave him space and control, his movements calm, deliberate, and careful. The second officer moved closer, shouting, accusing him of resisting. Darius tried again to explain, to make them understand that he was complying fully, but his words seemed to bounce off the wall of tension between them. The first officer's hand hovered near his belt, ready to escalate, while the second officer's gaze seemed sharp, searching for a reason to justify more aggressive action. Pedestrians began to notice the commotion. Some pulled out their phones, recording the scene quietly from a distance. The presence of cameras added a strange layer of pressure to the moment. Darius could feel their eyes on him, watching closely, but he maintained his calm exterior. Inside, his mind was working fast, calculating, analyzing, preparing for any sudden movements. Every training exercise he had ever done flashed through his memory, not for violence, but for control and protection. The tension escalated quickly when one of the officers reached toward the car without asking. Darius instinctively stepped back, keeping the door between himself and the officer. "Please don't touch the car," he said firmly, his tone calm yet unyielding. "My son is inside and I am cooperating." For a few moments, everything seemed frozen. The officer's eyes widened, surprised by his assertiveness. They had expected compliance, yes, but perhaps not this kind of measured confidence. Darius was calm, steady, and aware of every potential threat, yet he had no intention of making the situation worse. He was acting to protect, not provoke. "Put your hands where I can see them," one officer shouted again. Darius obeyed instantly, showing that he was not hiding anything. He knew that in moments like this, perception could be everything. One wrong movement could trigger a chain reaction that no one wanted. He also knew that remaining silent or panicked would not help. Darius spoke again, this time directing his words at both the officers and the surrounding crowd. "I am not a threat. My son is in the car. Please, let's handle this safely." His voice carried authority, but it was not loud or aggressive. It was calm, precise, and deliberate. People on the sidewalk watched in silence, some holding their breath. Minutes felt like hours. Darius could feel the tension in the air, heavy and suffocating. The officers' hands hovered near their weapons. Darius's military instincts kept him grounded. He positioned himself to protect his son and himself without drawing unnecessary attention. His breathing was steady. Every movement was calculated yet fluid and natural. Finally, one of the officers attempted to step closer. Darius raised his hand slightly, showing that he was unarmed, yet signaling that any sudden move could endanger his child. The officer paused, suddenly aware that this man was not behaving like someone who would panic or react unpredictably. The crowd murmured softly. People whispered to each other, some exchanging worried glances. The presence of witnesses seemed to add a layer of accountability that calmed the situation slightly. Darius's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the aggressive energy from the officers, creating an unusual balance in the chaos. Through it all, Darius remained aware of his son. The child looked sleepy but frightened, unsure why people were shouting. Darius crouched slightly, meeting his son's eyes, offering a reassuring smile and a gentle pat. "Everything is okay, buddy. Just a small problem and we'll fix it," he whispered. His words were simple, but they carried a protective weight that only a parent could convey. As the officers reassessed the situation, Darius realized how fragile encounters like these could be. A routine traffic stop had spiraled into something dangerous, simply because of assumptions, fear, and misjudgment. He reflected on how often misunderstandings between police and civilians turned deadly, especially for black men. This thought was sobering, but it didn't shake him. It only reinforced the importance of remaining calm and protecting those he loved. Finally, one of the officers stepped back slightly, lowering his hand. Darius sensed a shift, a slight acknowledgement that perhaps they had misread the situation. He kept his hands visible, his tone steady, continuing to reassure his son. "We're almost done here. Just stay calm, okay?" His words were a lifeline, not only for his child but also for himself, anchoring him in the moment. The incident, though still unresolved, had reached a critical pause. Darius' composure, his training, and his protective instincts had prevented immediate violence. He had not raised his voice, had not made sudden moves, yet he had conveyed a presence that demanded caution and respect. For the first time, he saw the officers hesitate, reconsidering their actions, aware that this man was not ordinary. Even as the tension lingered, Darius held on to one guiding principle: protect your child, remain calm, and avoid unnecessary escalation. He understood that his life experience gave him tools that few others possessed, but he also knew that real courage was measured by restraint, not aggression. As the first part of the encounter drew to a close, Darius felt a mixture of relief and wariness. The officers were momentarily uncertain, and the crowd watched silently. He knew that the situation could erupt again at any moment, but he also knew that by staying calm, thinking clearly, and positioning himself carefully, he had already gained a crucial advantage, one that no weapon or aggression could replace. Darius's quiet strength, honed through years of rigorous training, had transformed a potentially deadly encounter into a controlled standoff. And although the immediate danger had not fully passed, he felt a quiet determination. This was his world, his responsibility, and he would ensure that his child remained safe, no matter what happened next. The tension in the air felt like it had a weight of its own. Darius stood outside his car, hands still visible as the officers' aggressive postures suggested that they were not willing to let this pass easily. His son shifted slightly in his booster seat, rubbing his eyes and looking confused, sensing the seriousness of the moment. Darius crouched a little, leaning closer to his son without turning his back to the officers. "It's okay," he whispered. "Just stay calm, and we'll get through this." His voice was soft, but it carried a firmness that made it clear he was fully aware of the situation, One of the officers suddenly moved closer, his boots scraping against the asphalt, and Darius instinctively took a small step back to maintain space. The officer's face was tight, eyes darting between Darius and the car. "Hands where I can see them!" he shouted again. Darius obeyed, keeping his movement slow and deliberate. Every gesture was carefully controlled, a product of years of training where even a single wrong step could have fatal consequences. The second officer circled slightly, attempting to flank him, and the momentary shift in position made Darius's instincts flare. His body tensed, ready to react, but he did not want to escalate. He knew that any sudden movement might be misinterpreted. Instead, he adjusted subtly, turning his body in a way that protected both himself and his son without appearing aggressive. His eyes never left the officers, constantly measuring their intentions and energy. "Step back from the car," one officer demanded, his voice rising with each word. Darius complied, moving just a few feet away, making it clear he was not resisting. Yet he noticed the subtle shifts in their stances, the way they held themselves like predators expecting a fight. Darius's training had taught him to read these micro-signals, and he understood that this was a test, a tense standoff where timing, calmness, and composure could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. Around them, the small crowd of onlookers had grown. Some whispered nervously, others filmed quietly on their phones. A few children peeked out from behind their parents, curiosity and fear mixing in their wide eyes. Darius was aware of the witnesses, but he did not let them distract him. Their presence was secondary. His priority was the safety of his son and preventing any unnecessary violence. The first officer suddenly reached toward the car door again, and Darius instinctively raised his hands in a defensive but non-threatening posture. "Please," he said calmly, "my child is inside. Do not touch the car. We can solve this peacefully." His voice was quiet, yet every word had weight. He was not shouting, he was not panicking, but there was an unmistakable authority in his tone, a sense that he was someone who had faced life-or-death situations before. The officer paused, perhaps surprised by the calm precision in Darius' words and movements. In that brief hesitation, Darius seized a mental advantage. He had learned through years of service that split-second pauses could prevent tragedy. By remaining calm and measured, he forced the situation to slow down slightly, giving everyone a chance to breathe, think, and reassess. Darius noticed a faint tremor in the second officer's hand as it hovered near his belt. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but he recognized it instantly. Fear, uncertainty, and the realization that this man was not ordinary were all mingling in that small gesture. Darius did not take pleasure in seeing this. He knew fear could escalate violence, but he understood that his calmness and confidence were influencing the scene. The child in the car stirred again, whimpering slightly. Darius leaned closer, whispering reassuring words. "It's okay, buddy. We're safe. Just stay calm. Everything will be fine." His son looked at him, eyes wide and uncertain, and Darius gave a small nod, silently promising that he would handle this situation without letting harm come to him. The child's innocence added a layer of urgency to the moment. Every choice Darius made was now influenced by the responsibility of protecting a life so vulnerable. The first officer spoke again, trying to assert control. "Step away from the vehicle. Move now." His voice was loud and demanding, but Darius did not flinch. He moved slightly backward, keeping his hands visible and maintaining a safe distance. He avoided any sudden gestures that could be misread as aggression. Every inch of space he preserved was intentional, a calculated effort to manage the potential threat. Then a misunderstanding escalated. One of the officers thought Darius had reached for something in his pocket. Time seemed to slow. In an instant, the tension could have exploded into violence. But Darius's training kicked in automatically. He did not move hastily, did not raise his voice. Instead, he kept his hands clearly visible, tilted his body slightly to the side, and spoke with calm authority. "I am not reaching for anything. My hands are open. Please, let's avoid this escalating." The officer froze, caught off guard by the composure and clarity in Darius's words. This pause was critical. It allowed for a moment of rational thought in an otherwise highly charged situation. Bystanders shifted uneasily, sensing that the outcome could go either way. Darius's calmness acted like a buffer, slowing the tension just enough to prevent disaster. Darius took a moment to assess his surroundings. His eyes flicked between the officers, his car, his son, and the small crowd of onlookers. Each movement, each glance was deliberate. He was prepared to act, but only if absolutely necessary. He understood the lethal consequences of misjudgment and knew that patience, observation, and measured action were his most powerful tools at that moment. A neighbor, standing nearby, whispered to another witness, "Why are they treating him like that?" "He's just a man with a kid." The comment barely reached Darius's ears, but he noted the concern and tension in the crowd. It reminded him that the world was watching, that his actions mattered beyond just his own life. He had to model calm, measured behavior, both for his son and for those witnessing this incident. The officer's aggression did not lessen, but Darius' poise and clarity began to influence their behavior subtly. He continued to speak calmly, reinforcing the idea that he was not a threat. "Please check my ID. You'll see I am fully cooperating. Let's handle this safely for everyone." His words were steady, deliberate, and free from anger or sarcasm. As minutes passed, the first officer lowered his voice slightly, though his posture remained defensive. Darius noticed the change and maintained his careful movements. He did not take this as a victory. He understood that the situation was far from resolved, yet he recognized the importance of small shifts in behavior. They could prevent escalation and buy critical time. The second officer, still tense, began to step back slightly, his hands moving away from immediate contact with Darius. It was a subtle acknowledgement that the man in front of him was not easily intimidated, that he was aware, controlled, and capable. Darius maintained his calm, offering no challenge, no provocation. He simply existed in the space with awareness and control. Throughout all of this, Darius's mind never stopped processing. He mentally rehearsed potential outcomes, prepared for the worst, but hoped for the best. He was aware that many people in his position, especially black men in encounters with law enforcement, had faced tragedy simply because of assumptions, fear, or misunderstanding. His goal was not to fight, but to survive and protect. The child in the back seat shifted again, and Darius crouched slightly to meet his gaze. "Stay calm, buddy. Dad's got this. Everything will be okay." His reassurance was genuine, not performative. The bond between parent and child added gravity to the moment, reminding him that every decision he made could affect not just his life, but another's innocence and safety. Brilliantly, the tension began to show signs of easing, albeit slightly. The officer's stances softened, if only a little. Darius kept his hands visible, voice calm, and body posture protective but non-threatening. The crowd's whispers grew louder, some encouraging the officers to reconsider, others expressing silent relief that nothing violent had occurred. Darius remained fully alert, knowing that the situation was far from over. He had gained a temporary balance, a pause in the chaos, but he could not allow himself to relax. Every step, every gesture, every word mattered. His training and experience were guiding him, reminding him that control, patience, and awareness were the most effective forms of defense. By the time Part 2 reached its peak, the officers had temporarily halted their aggressive advance. Darius had not taken a single aggressive action, had not raised his voice, yet he had conveyed unmistakable awareness and capability. It was a delicate balance, projecting enough authority to prevent harm, while maintaining calm to avoid provoking violence. In this tense standoff, Darius' greatest strength was not his physical ability, but his control over his mind, body, and environment. He had transformed fear into focus, panic into calculated awareness, and threat into an opportunity to protect those he loved. As the minutes passed, he held his position, fully prepared for whatever might happen next, determined to ensure the safety of his son and himself above all else. The standoff stretched on, each second feeling heavier than the last. Darius could sense that the officer's patience was running thin, and any small misstep could ignite chaos. He stayed calm, but his senses were on high alert. Years of Delta Force training had conditioned him to notice the smallest detail: the shift in an officer's weight, the way their eyes darted, the tension in their fingers. Every micro-movement carried meaning, and he read each one carefully. He knew that while he wanted to avoid confrontation, he also needed to protect himself and his son. This was a dangerous game, where the slightest mistake could escalate beyond anyone's control. Darius' breathing remained steady, his voice calm as he addressed the officers again. "I'm cooperating fully," he said, his tone firm but not aggressive. My son is in the car. I don't want anyone to get hurt. The first officer took a hesitant step back, clearly reassessing the situation. Darius recognized the pause as an opportunity. He shifted slightly, keeping his hands visible, and made sure there was a clear line between himself and the officers. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, and measured. He was prepared to act if needed, but he did not want to escalate unnecessarily. Suddenly, one of the officers moved closer again, his hand hovering near his belt. Darius froze, his body tensing instinctively. His mind raced through scenarios, mentally rehearsing how to respond without putting his son at risk. In his Delta Force training, he had learned to stay calm under extreme pressure, to evaluate every action before committing to it. Now that training was his lifeline. Stay calm, he whispered to himself, glancing back at his son. The child's wide eyes were filled with fear and confusion, and Darius felt a surge of protective instinct. He crouched slightly, lowering his profile without turning his back to the officers. "It's okay," he said softly. "Dad's here. Nothing's going to happen to you." The second officer, noticing the slight shift in Darius's posture, took a cautious step back as well. It was clear that they were starting to realize this man was not like any ordinary civilian. His calmness, precision, and awareness radiated an authority that was hard to ignore. Darius did not raise his voice or make sudden moves, yet his presence commanded attention. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Passers-by had stopped to watch, their phones raised, recording the scene silently. Some whispered to each other while others simply stared, unsure of what to do. Darius could feel their gaze, but he did not let it affect him. He knew that he needed to focus entirely on the immediate threat, the officers and the safety of his son. Then, a small noise, a car horn from a passing vehicle, made the officers flinch. Darius remained completely still, eyes locked on theirs, waiting for them to regain composure. In moments like these, even small distractions could turn deadly, and he had learned to stay grounded, to use every pause to his advantage. One officer stepped forward again, this time more cautiously. "Hands up!" he shouted. Darius complied immediately, raising his arms slightly while keeping them open and visible. "I'm unarmed," he said calmly. "Please, let's not escalate this. My child is in the car. We can handle this safely." The officer hesitated, clearly caught between following protocol and recognizing the unique nature of this man in front of him. Darius seized the opportunity to reinforce his position. "You don't need to worry," he continued, his voice steady. "I'm not resisting. I just want to make sure my son is safe." For a few tense moments, the officers seemed unsure of what to do. Darius could see it in their eyes. They were wary, hesitant, and realizing that their assumptions about him had been wrong. He did not relax, but he noted the change in their demeanor. Every second of hesitation worked in his favor, giving him a critical edge in maintaining control without escalating the situation. The child in the back seat whined softly, and Darius crouched a little lower, making sure his son felt protected. "It's okay," he whispered. "Nothing bad is going to happen. Just stay calm and we'll be fine." His words were calm, deliberate, and filled with reassurance. He understood that his child's perception of safety depended entirely on him in this moment. Suddenly, a miscommunication almost set off disaster. One officer thought Darius had reached toward his pocket again. Time seemed to slow. Darius froze instantly, raising both hands to show clearly that he was unarmed. "I'm not reaching for anything," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I am fully cooperating. Please, let's not escalate this." The officer froze, caught off guard by Darius's calm and precise response. The pause was critical. It allowed a moment of rational thought to enter an otherwise highly charged situation. Darius held his position unwavering, showing that he could respond if needed, but chose restraint. Darius's mind raced, analyzing the environment, the officers, and the crowd. Every person, every movement, every shadow mattered. He was aware that even a single misinterpreted gesture could lead to tragedy. He relied on his training to stay composed, to anticipate reactions, and to protect his son at all costs. The crowd murmured quietly, their tension palpable. Some whispered encouragements to the officers to de-escalate, while others silently observed, holding their breath. Darius remained focused entirely on the immediate moment. His calmness was contagious, subtly influencing those around him, but his attention never wavered from the officers. Minutes stretched on like hours. The officer's aggression began to waver slightly. Darius noticed the small shift. Their movements became less rigid, their gestures less threatening. It was subtle, but in this moment, subtlety could save lives. Darius did not let his guard down. He simply maintained a steady, controlled presence. Then a loud shout from a bystander broke the tension briefly. "Hey, don't do anything rash." The words echoed in the street, causing both the officers and Darius to momentarily reassess. The crowd's presence was a reminder that this encounter was being watched, and that the world beyond the immediate confrontation was noticing. Darius used it as a chance to reinforce calm. He spoke again, clearly and deliberately, addressing the officers while keeping his son in view. "I am not a threat. My son is in the car. Please, let's handle this safely. I just want everyone to walk away unharmed." His tone was neither pleading nor aggressive. It was commanding in its clarity and calmness. The first officer took another step back, lowering his hand slightly. The second officer mirrored the movement, their energy changing subtly. Darius sensed that he was beginning to gain control, not through aggression but through calm, deliberate awareness, and the ability to influence the situation with precision. He crouched a little lower, keeping his son visible, and continued speaking softly. "Stay calm, buddy. We're almost done here. Dad's got this." His words were genuine, reassuring, and carried a protective weight. The child's eyes met his, and Darius gave a small nod, silently promising that nothing would harm him. Despite the slight easing of tension, Darius remained alert. He knew this was a fragile balance. One sudden move, one misinterpretation could undo everything. He relied on every ounce of training, every experience from his past to maintain awareness and control. His body was ready to react if necessary, but his preference was always restraint. For several minutes, the standoff continued like this, tense, controlled, and filled with unspoken understanding. The officers were beginning to recognize that Darius was not an ordinary man. He was calm, aware, disciplined, and protective, yet entirely non-threatening. His presence alone influenced their behavior, slowing the potential for escalation and preventing immediate danger. Darius knew that this was the kind of moment that could have gone badly in seconds if he had acted impulsively. His choice to remain calm, to protect his son, and to communicate clearly was critical. It was not bravery in the conventional sense. It was intelligence, restraint, and focus under extreme pressure. As Part 3 drew to a close, the situation had not yet fully resolved, but Darius had established a clear presence of control. He had not taken any aggressive actions, yet the officers were beginning to acknowledge his authority in subtle ways. The tension had shifted slightly in his favor, and he was prepared for whatever might come next. Darius's ability to manage the confrontation, protect his son, and remain completely aware of every detail was the defining factor in this encounter. It was not just about physical capability. It was about mental clarity, emotional control, and the ability to influence the environment without aggression. In that tense street, with a small crowd watching and officers unsure of their next move, Darius had transformed a potentially dangerous situation into a careful balance of awareness, restraint, and protection. And though the outcome was still uncertain, he had already proven that true strength lay not in violence but in calm, deliberate control under pressure. The tension in the street had not fully lifted, but a subtle change had begun. Darius could sense it in the officers' movements, in the slight hesitation in their voices, in the way they now kept a little more distance. The standoff had stretched on for what felt like an eternity, each second weighing heavily on everyone present. Darius's son, still in the car, looked up at him with trust in his eyes, and Darius knew that he had to remain calm, not just for himself, but for the child who relied entirely on him in this moment. Darius crouched slightly, keeping his son in sight while maintaining a protective stance. "We're going to be okay," he whispered softly. "Just stay calm, everything will be fine." His words were gentle, reassuring, but there was a firmness beneath them, a signal that he was fully aware of the danger and fully capable of handling it. The child nodded slowly, trusting his father completely, unaware of the complexity of the situation, but sensitive enough to pick up the fear and tension surrounding them. The first officer, sensing the calm authority Darius projected, took a cautious step back. His partner mirrored the movement, though still wary. Darius knew that he had created a pause A moment of reflection for the officers, a chance for them to reassess the assumptions that had escalated this encounter. He did not relax, but he recognized the shift, understanding that it gave him a critical advantage in keeping the situation from spiraling out of control. Darius's mind worked quickly, reviewing every option available to him. He had no desire for confrontation, but he was fully prepared for it if necessary. His military training had ingrained in him the importance of awareness, positioning, and control. Every movement, every breath, and every word was intentional, designed to maintain calm while simultaneously asserting presence. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalks, some whispering to each other, others filming silently. The presence of witnesses added another layer to the situation. Darius knew that their attention could influence the officers' actions, subtly encouraging them to reconsider their approach. He also knew that he had to maintain composure for their sake. Any rash action could trigger panic or violence in the crowd. One of the officers stepped forward again, speaking in a slightly lower tone. "Step away from the vehicle," he said. "Keep your hands visible." Darius complied without hesitation, adjusting his position just enough to give space and control, without appearing confrontational. His movements were fluid, deliberate, and controlled, demonstrating that he was not a threat but also not someone to be underestimated. The child in the back seat shifted again, looking worried. Darius crouched slightly lower, meeting his son's gaze and offering a reassuring smile. "It's okay," he whispered. "We're almost done. Just stay calm and nothing will happen to you." His words carried more than reassurance. They carried the authority of someone who had faced life or death situations and had emerged unscathed through discipline and patience. Sudden noise, a car horn from a passing vehicle, made the officers flinch briefly. Darius remained completely still, hands visible, eyes on theirs. Small distractions like this could escalate quickly, but he had learned to turn these moments into opportunities for control. The officers, startled by the sound, hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Darius maintained his calm, subtly reinforcing the message that he was in control without aggression. Then, a moment of misinterpretation nearly triggered disaster. One officer thought Darius had reached for something in his pocket. Time seemed to stretch as Darius froze instantly, raising both hands higher, palms visible. "I'm not reaching for anything," he said clearly, his voice calm but firm. "Please, I am fully cooperating. Let's handle this safely." The officer froze, caught off guard by the calm precision in Darius's words and posture. In that brief pause, the officers had a moment to reassess. Darius had turned a potentially deadly situation into one controlled by presence, awareness, and restraint. He remained grounded, aware of every movement, every sound, and every shift in energy around him. The crowd around them murmured softly. Some whispered encouragement to the officers to de-escalate, while others exchanged worried glances. Darius remained focused entirely on his son and the officers, maintaining calm while subtly influencing the situation through his composed demeanor. He understood that perception was critical. By projecting confidence without aggression, he was able to maintain control and prevent a rash response from anyone present. Minutes passed, each one feeling heavier than the last. The officers' movements had softened slightly, though they remained cautious. Darius could sense that they were beginning to understand that this was not a typical encounter. He was calm, controlled, disciplined, and fully aware, qualities that communicated more authority than any words could. He crouched slightly, leaning just enough to keep his son visible and protected, while maintaining a stable stance. "Stay calm, buddy," he whispered again. "We're going to be okay. Dad's got this." The child's wide eyes reflected trust and fear in equal measure, and Darius responded with a small nod, silently promising safety and control. The bond between parent and child added weight to every decision he made. It sharpened his focus, intensified his awareness, and reinforced his commitment to restraint. The first officer spoke again, this time in a lower tone. "Sir, keep your hands visible and step back from the car." Darius complied smoothly, adjusting just enough to maintain space and control, reinforcing the non-threatening but authoritative presence he had established. His movements were deliberate, precise, and careful, every inch calculated to prevent escalation while keeping his son safe. The second officer mirrored the movement, a slight hesitation in his body language revealing uncertainty. Darius recognized the shift. He had managed to influence the situation without confrontation. The officers were beginning to reconsider, understanding that the man before them was not ordinary and could not be intimidated or rushed. A neighbor, watching from across the street, muttered to another bystander, "He's so calm. I can't believe it." Darius overheard just enough to know that people were noticing his composure, but he did not let it distract him. Every decision remained focused on protection and restraint. The awareness of witnesses added a subtle layer of accountability that reinforced the importance of his careful actions. Then, an unexpected opportunity arose. One officer, visibly reassessing the situation, took a small step back and lowered his hand from his belt. The other officer mirrored the movement. It was subtle, but in moments like these, small shifts were critical. Darius maintained his calm posture, voice steady and eyes alert, recognizing that the moment of de-escalation had begun. He crouched slightly lower, speaking softly to his son. "It's okay, buddy. Just stay calm. We're almost done here. Nothing bad is going to happen." The child responded with a small nod, trusting completely in his father's protection. Darius felt a wave of relief, knowing that his calm, deliberate actions were keeping his son safe and beginning to influence the officer's behavior. Darius knew that the situation was still fragile. One misstep, one misinterpretation, and the tension could flare again. But he also understood that he had gained an advantage. He had projected awareness, authority, and calm in a way that commanded respect without aggression. His training had taught him that control, not confrontation, was the most powerful tool in dangerous situations. Minutes stretched on, and the standoff gradually began to lose its intensity. The officers' gestures became less rigid, their voices softer, their movements more cautious. Darius maintained his protective stance, keeping his son in sight while observing every detail. He was fully aware that the encounter was far from over, but he had established a foundation of calm control that made violence less likely. Finally, one officer spoke. "Sir, we need to check your ID and make sure everything is okay." Darius nodded calmly, keeping his hands visible. "Of course. I am fully cooperating," he said. "My son is in the car, and I just want everyone to remain safe." His words were measured, respectful, yet firm, reinforcing the non-threatening but authoritative presence he had maintained throughout the encounter. The officers moved cautiously toward him, no longer shouting or raising their voices. Darius continued to position himself strategically, ready to protect his son if necessary, but also prepared to comply fully to resolve the situation peacefully. The balance of tension had shifted thanks to his patience, awareness, and controlled actions. As Part 4 drew to a close, Darius realized the true power of calm and presence. He had navigated an extremely dangerous encounter without aggression, protected his child, and influenced the behavior of trained officers, all through discipline, awareness, and mental clarity. The situation was beginning to de-escalate, and though it was not yet fully resolved, he had already turned the tide through his human-centric approach: protection, calm, and calculated awareness. The tension that had gripped the street for what felt like an eternity was finally beginning to ease. Darius remained alert, but he could sense that the officers were no longer moving with the same aggressive energy. Their earlier assumptions had started to crumble as they realized that the man standing before them was calm, disciplined, and clearly focused on protecting his child rather than provoking any confrontation. Every movement, every word, every gesture from Darius had shifted the balance, transforming a dangerous standoff into a situation that could finally be resolved peacefully. Darius crouched slightly, his eyes never leaving his son, who was beginning to relax just a little. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered softly. "We're almost done here. Everything will be fine." The boy looked at his father, his wide eyes still filled with uncertainty but now tinged with trust. Darius gave him a reassuring nod, silently promising that no harm would come to him. In that moment, the bond between parent and child felt stronger than ever, anchoring Darius's focus and reminding him of why he had to remain calm. The first officer finally spoke in a measured tone, clearly attempting to regain some control while acknowledging the unusual nature of the encounter. "Sir, we need to check your ID and confirm that everything is fine." Darius nodded slowly, raising his hands to show he was fully cooperative. "Of course," he said calmly. "I am cooperating fully. My son is in the car, and I just want everyone to be safe." His voice was steady, controlled, and carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced life-or-death situations before and had learned the value of patience and restraint. The second officer moved cautiously, his posture less tense than before. Darius could sense that the atmosphere had shifted. The